Good evening. My name is Dominique Padurano. My students call me Dr. P. I am the president and founder of Crimson Coaching, which provides academic tutoring, test prep, and college consulting to students worldwide. This talk is called Introduction to American Colleges, Universities, and Applications. So just a little bit about me. Before I founded Crimson Coaching to work one-on-one with students in 2014, I was a high school teacher. I taught history for on and off for 10 years. In the middle, I got a Ph.D. And, I just love this talk because after I graduated from Harvard, I actually went and studied abroad in France for a year. So I have a lot of sympathy for people who perhaps didn't go to school in this country and now their children perhaps are attending or want to attend American universities. Sometimes people ask me, why did you name your company Crimson Coaching? My alma mater is Harvard. As you maybe can see from the mats of the class photo and diploma behind me, that's crimson, the color of Harvard. And what I do is I coach students to achieve their full potential. And I developed this talk so that I could really give you the power of just knowledge and an introduction to what is likely, if you did not grow up in this country, a very different university system than probably existed in your home country of origin. So for tonight's talk, I'll be speaking for about 40 minutes. During that time, you can feel free to put your questions in the chat. I'm not always able to toggle back and forth very well between my slides and the chat, but I always answer them afterwards. You can feel free in the Q&A at the end to unmute yourself. We're a relatively small group, but if you would keep yourself muted for the duration of my prepared remarks, that would just help me maintain my concentration a little better. I just want to thank you before we go any further for attending tonight's talk. I know October is a really busy time of year, the fall in general for families, so thank you for showing up. Thank you to Catherine Burnson, the librarian, who is hosting in the background and taking care of any technical issues, and to Hop Hog Public Library for sponsoring tonight's talk. So as a historian, that's what my PhD is in, I like to be really transparent about my sources. So I'll kind of fill you in on where my sources are coming from. So as I mentioned, some of my sources will be personal. That's actually where I lived as an undergraduate at Harvard in my junior and senior years. That's called Dunster House, that little house with the crimson dome. I went to, on the occasion of my 25th reunion, 25 years after I graduated from Harvard, I went to a talk given by the undergraduate director of admissions, then the undergraduate director of admissions, William Fitzsimmons. And he shared with our class, many of whom had children who wanted to apply to Harvard, just little tips and tricks about applying anywhere, not just to Harvard. So I thought that some of those appear here. Also, as I mentioned, professionally, I was a high school teacher. I started my career back in the late 90s at Great Neck North. I ended my full-time teaching career at high school, I should say, at Scarsdale High School. I now also teach as a college professor. And I taught for 5 years at the independent day school, Horace Mann School in Riverdale, New York. But the bulk of my really source material now comes from working with students, many of whom come from abroad. And just I've worked with students from the UK, Belgium, South Africa, Mexico, Brazil, Israel, Russia, Spain. And, I've become to know sort of what they don't know while coaching them. And so some of that I'll share with you today. And then finally, there are two books that I highly recommend if you have children or you yourself will be applying to school in a couple of years, in the next couple of years. Jeffrey Salingo is a New York Times journalist. In 2020, he published Who Gets In and Why, A Year Inside College Admissions, which I highly recommend. And his colleague, personal finance columnist Ron Lieber, wrote The Price You Pay for College. And I highly recommend both of those books. And I would be very surprised if Hop Hog didn't have copies of both. So one really basic question that people who didn't go to college here in the United States often ask, what's the difference between a college and a university? And the short answer is really not much. But a college technically only offers undergraduate degrees, 2-year and 4-year degrees, whereas a university can offer postgraduate degrees such as master's and doctorates. However, more and more colleges that were designated colleges when they first opened and maybe only offered 2- and 4-year degrees have sometimes evolved to offer masters or even doctorates, but they haven't really changed their name. So really, you will find many colleges that also offer graduate degrees as well. Like the United States itself, our post-secondary educational system in the United States is very diverse. There are over 5,300 colleges and universities. Some are private and for-profit. For the purposes of this talk, I will really not be including them because I generally don't advocate students go to them because sometimes they go out of business. And then if you are in the middle of getting your degree, you may have to start all over elsewhere. There are private but nonprofit universities like Harvard, like MIT, there's different, Stanford, those obviously, even though they're nonprofit, it still costs money to go there. And then there's public, which are also de facto nonprofit, universities and colleges that usually are chartered by the state, but in large cities like New York City, also San Francisco, there are also city colleges at the city system also as well. But we do not have, unlike in other countries, for instance, in France, there are not really national universities. Generally, these are a lower sticker price. However, depending on a private college's endowment and your family's financial need, you actually may pay less at a private college than you would at a public college. I myself am not a financial aid expert, but I can just tell you anecdotally, I myself got a lot of money. My father was a police officer. My mother was only starting her teaching career back when I went to college. So I got a lot of loans and also aid at a school like Harvard, which does have a great endowment. But, even at schools with less of an endowment, you may get merit aid to go there. So you really you shouldn't shy away from applying to private schools based only on the sticker price, because very few people actually pay the sticker price. So how do you really figure out what college or university is the best for you or your child? Well, I would recommend, if you have a child that's in between the 8th and 10th grade, or even actually in 11th grade, we are so fortunate in our neck of the woods to have, within a 2-hour radius from us, a huge variety of different sorts of institutions. We have urban, suburban, rural schools, large and small and medium schools, public and private, as well as all the different permutations. So for example, a small suburban private school like Sarah Lawrence College in Westchester, and a large suburban public school like Stony Brook, right in our backyard. So I think it's great while your child is still young to take a weekend here and there, one weekend day, and drive to that school, take a tour, walk around. Your child should know by the time they are in 11th grade what permutation of these three different characteristics they like best. So that when you then are going out of state, you're not kind of randomly, shooting at the wall, hoping, to find something that's right. For example, you're not visiting both Chapman University in Los Angeles and UCLA, which are very different types of schools. And that should hopefully make your out of state trips a lot shorter and hopefully more cost efficient. So some resources where you can start learning about colleges. The Fisk Guide is it's sort of like the Bible of colleges. It's a big, thick book. And I also bet that Hauppauge probably gets it every year. It's updated every year. It doesn't have all 5,300 colleges and universities in the United States, but I think it has somewhere between 1,000 and 2,000. So, not too shabby. You can also go on individual college websites and take virtual tours. Now, again, a caveat. I think this is great when you're in 8th through 10th or maybe even 11th grade. But by maybe the first half of 11th grade. But I really think that, students will tell me all the time, I can't really tell the difference between different schools through virtual tours. And I think that there's no substitute for going to see those schools in person. And now we're really fortunate, now that COVID has abated, you're able to access campuses much more than you were able to 1 or 2 or 3 years ago, or I should say 1 or 2 years ago. Also, your guidance counselors or the counselor office should be able to help you learn about colleges. Also, at many high schools, colleges will visit those high schools. Students should definitely take advantage of those visits that colleges make to their own high school to learn more about them. There are also regional college fairs that you can, I'm sure you could look for. College fairs, Suffolk County, college fairs, Long Island. This often happens to be the time of year when a lot of them are around. So this would be a good time of year to check that out. And then, of course, there are people like me, private college counselors, who can take your child's exact needs, wants, as well as their academic profile and put together a college list that is appropriate for them. So those are all different kind of resources for you. So how do colleges in the United States evaluate applicants? Those of you familiar with European systems may know that there is a big exam at the end of high school that students study and study and study and study for, and that determines where they might be able to go to college. Not so in the United States. The primary criterion of college admissions is the rigor of your coursework and the grades that you got in those courses. So if you are looking for a highly selective college, highly selective is a designation that that college admits fewer than 40% of those who apply. You really want to try to take rigorous courses like APs, honors, IB, if your school offers the International Baccalaureate, and you want to try to get the highest grades that you can in those courses. Now, there's a lot of buzz, and I'm sure many of you know that since March of 2020, many colleges have gone test optional. In the immediate wake of the pandemic, that was simply because students really could not take SAT and ACT because they weren't able to really find the tests weren't being offered. Now, however, the colleges have continued. Many of them feel that they can still fill their freshman classes well without those tests. Very small number, however, have gone back to requiring the SAT and ACT. For example, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology and Georgia Institute of Technology, or Georgia Tech and MIT, both have required it. And surprise that those are schools where students have to take a lot of math, right? And so the rationale for requiring those tests is because those colleges feel like they can better assess students' mathematical abilities by their scores on the SAT and ACT. I'm just going to stop because Romeo had a question. Would you like to unmute yourself and ask a question?
Sure, thanks. The question I have is, you mentioned that the student should be taking up APs and honors and IBs to make upgrade, increase his chances of getting accepted into good colleges. So here's the question I have. Let's say a kid wants to study engineering, right? He has an option of taking a regular physics course versus an AP history course. Is the college going to prefer a candidate who has studied history with AP, or who has taken up more physics and math courses?
That's a great question. I would say, it's hard for me often to answer these questions in a vacuum, but if the student had limited resources of time, which of course they all do, right? And they had to choose between taking a harder physics course or a harder history course, and they knew that they wanted to study engineering, I would always recommend them to take the harder physics course. You will note, though, if you're looking at, this is my own designation. This is not anybody else's designation, but I recently gave a talk, and by the way, I'll be giving it again next week. It's called Choosing the Right Courses for choosing the right courses in middle school and high school for our highly selective college admissions. And if you go to my website, crimsoncoaching.com, it's down there on the bottom, and you scroll down to October 25th, you can register for that webinar for free. But, as I'll talk about there, if you're looking for the most highly selective colleges, which I alone designate as admitting fewer than 20% of the students that get admitted. So for example, MIT would fall into that category, but I don't think Georgia Tech would. I'd have to check the Georgia Tech one, but I'm sure MIT falls into that category. They're going to want somebody who is taking both the AP history and the hardest physics courses that they can, right? So another question that people often ask is, if you're getting poor grades in those AP classes, is it better to drop down to a regular class? My general rule of thumb is that if you're getting a B or better, stay in the AP honors track. But if you're getting below that, drop down, because psychologically that's going to do a lot for the student. It's probably also taking away too much time from their other courses, and a C is not going to look good for any highly selective college. However, again, if you're looking at the most highly selective colleges that are admitting, say fewer than 20% who apply, you're going to need an A in the AP courses too. So, it all kind of depends on where you're applying.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure. So one of the biggest differences between colleges abroad and colleges in the United States is that colleges in the United States do look at students' extracurricular activities. They don't count for nearly as much as the grades and coursework do, and oftentimes students are really upset to hear that, because many students put many hours every week into their extracurricular activities. And I often find that that's a little foolish if it comes at the expense of their grades. So unless you're really playing at the national level and have a very good chance of getting recruited by a school, it's extracurriculars are great, but if they are taking up so much time that they're driving your grades down, you probably want to rethink whether you should be doing as many extracurriculars as you are. Colleges will also require 2 teacher recommendations. Generally, they should be from the junior year, although they don't have to be. If you're applying to an academic school, you should, for a liberal arts or engineering, you should get one of the main subjects, math, science, English, history, or foreign language. If you're applying for an art or music school, you can have one of those be from an art or music teacher as well. The guidance counselor will also submit their own recommendation of your child. And then the college application essay is becoming an increasingly important part of this overall application, because so many students are opting not to submit the SAT and ACT. So when people say, well, how important is the college essay? I'll say, well, now instead of having 6 items by which they can judge your student, now they only have 5 if you're not applying with test scores. So now that has just taken on a much more important dimension. So I would not sort of, even by the way, for engineers, I have worked with several engineers in the past, and, now even engineering students need to be able to write. So in the United States, I'm sure many of you, if your children are already in high school, that some schools give grades on a 100-point scale, others on an A through F scale, with A being the highest. And oftentimes it's sort of converted into a 4-point average. So the GPA, or grade point average, is out of 4, but now many schools also often go beyond that in order to reflect the added difficulty, say, of AP or IB scores. In general, it's okay if a student's 9th grade grades are uneven, right? The transition between 8th and 9th grade is a very difficult one for students, and students who are current seniors had experienced in the end of their 9th grade COVID. And so, that's okay. I would say, generally, and again, the current senior class had 10th grade basically at home. So again, their grades may actually have dropped, and I believe college admissions officers are aware of that. But for most students, say those entering 9th grade now, or even having entered 9th grade last year, you need to really be showing progress by 10th grade if your grades in 9th grade were uneven. So regarding those standardized tests, just a generalized introduction to those of you who are unfamiliar with the SAT and ACT. The SAT, and I would say that this is going to change, just so that you know, the SAT will still have reading, grammar, and math on it in 2024, but it is going to be shorter. Currently, there are 149 questions that students need to answer in 160 minutes. 1,600 is the maximum score. There are two, the reading and grammar go into their evidence-based reading writing score, which is out of 800. And then there's two math scores, one with a calculator, one without a calculator. That's also out of 800. The ACT is the competitor to the SAT. They're accepted interchangeably by colleges. The ACT also has 4 sections, but rather than 2 math sections, it's got a grammar section, a math section, a reading section, and a science question. The big difference is the pace of the ACT. You have to answer 66 more questions than the current SAT in only 15 more minutes. So the SAT goes at a much faster pace. The other big difference is the scoring system. A 36 is the maximum score. There is also currently an optional essay, but that's the score on that does not affect the main score. I believe that test optional admissions are definitely continuing at most schools up until 2030. Many of the schools have already announced that. And I would imagine that is sort of the future. And I say that because the University of California system has changed from test optional to test blind, which means that you cannot submit your scores to the University of California system anymore. And I believe that is probably a bellwether of what's to come beyond 2030. But we'll see. If things go really bad at University of California, maybe they'll go back to the test. For now, though, for students who come from Long Island, where there's a lot of competition, there are a lot of good high schools, a lot of students heading to college, I would strongly recommend at least trying to take one of these tests and not just walk in having not prepared. I mean, prepare for them and give it all they got, because if they get a good score, it can help them. If they don't get a good score, well, then they can always withhold that if the school is test optional. There's a lot more to say about standardized tests that is beyond the scope of tonight's talk. But if you go to youtube.com/Crimson Coaching, you can find my to SAT or not to SAT video where I go into this slide in much, much, much more detail. So in terms of extracurricular activities, right? Oh, there's a spelling error on my slide. I'm sorry about that. I have 2 TIs. It's very, those of you who perhaps may have heard about college admissions, say among your American friends in the 80s and 90s, the buzzword then was the importance of being well-rounded, doing a little of this, a little of that, and a little of the other. Now, colleges are looking for much more specialization. And one great way to do that is a passion or an impact project. Again, I go into that much more into detail in a whole talk I give on impact projects. But this would be a sort of independently led project that a student directs themselves, either with or without a mentor. I happen to mentor students doing these, and that can show and really dovetail nicely with a student's, say, college essay or their plans for study. So for example, I mentored a student who is now studying psychology at UCLA, who started a tutoring group of elementary school students among her, she sort of corralled her high school friends to tutor those younger children. And she did a psychological research study in looking at what's the impact of having a big brother, big sister type of relationship on those younger students' self-esteem. And she developed a questionnaire, which she delivered before and after. She wrote that study up in the style of a psychological research journal paper. And even though, she encountered many obstacles because she was doing this at the height of COVID, I believe her resilience in responding to those challenges and then in writing about them for her college application was part of what got her accepted to UCLA. Just so that you know, out of school activities are fine. So often, students don't have the activity that they want at their high school. That's totally fine. Extracurricular activities are great because they don't just show up in the list form on the Common App, which is the portal through which students will apply to most of these colleges, but they also can serve as fodder, as I sort of just suggested, on the main college essay and on supplemental essays that colleges will require students to write. In all of these activities, you really want to be aware of paid trips, especially if they are the main or the only activities that a student has. I think colleges are very wary of, my parents paid for me to go to Costa Rica and build a school. It's wonderful, but I think that they are much more interested in authentic activities that you yourself are really interested in, and frankly, that parents don't have to spend thousands and thousands of dollars on. In terms of teacher and counselor recommendations, the big difference that I think most students kind of leave these recommendations up to chance, and they don't realize that they have a real opportunity to shape what those recommendations will say by cultivating a relationship with these adults from the 9th grade onwards. Students, I recommend visiting teachers, visiting counselors so that they get to know you. Students are sometimes very uncomfortable in speaking to adults, but I do think that this will pay dividends when those teachers and counselors can actually put in how well a child can converse with them and how much they've grown over the course of the 3 years of high school. I recommend that juniors directly ask the 2 teachers whom they're thinking of asking for letters of recommendation in May or June before they leave for the summer. First of all, teachers who teach juniors are often bombarded by requests for letters in September. So much better that you get in on the ground floor. And some schools actually limit the number of letters that junior teachers can write because it just becomes, for instance, I used to teach juniors, and writing 25 letters of recommendation is a lot. It's very time consuming, and teachers don't get paid extra for that. So you want to make sure that your child gets in on the ground floor, but also don't just ask, will you write me a letter? Ask, will you write me a strong letter? Because a lot of times, if your child has not cultivated that relationship with the teacher might not have anything outstanding to say about your child. I myself was the type of teacher who would much rather, sort of break a student's heart. I only had to do this once in all my years of teaching, but I did do it when a child asked me, will you write me a letter? And I said, I think you'd be better off asking somebody else for that letter. And they did, because I didn't want to sabotage their chances of getting accepted to the college of their dreams. Not every teacher is okay with having that conversation, so they may write you a lukewarm letter, which is definitely not what you want. So make sure that it's a strong letter. You should also offer to give them a resume, give them a transcript, ask them what they need to write you a good letter and when they need it by, so that that letter is uploaded to Naviance or Score or whatever system your school uses, so that that's in by October 1st. So let's just talk very briefly about what the college essay is. When I'm talking about the college essay, I mean the 650-word personal statement that's an answer to one of 7 questions put out by the most common portal in the United States, which is the Common Application. It is not the only portal, however. Coalition is another portal. Universal is much less widely used. Those of you who might be from the UK may know UCAS. The University of California system has its own portal, as do many schools out west, and students should be aware that oftentimes those questions have no relationship to the Common App. So you're writing a 650-word essay for the Common App, and then, for example, if you want to apply to UC Berkeley, for example, you're now writing 4 personal interest questions of 350 words each. Very different. That is a lot of writing. And so, in addition, many competitive schools require supplemental essays that can range anywhere from 25 words up to 650 additional words. This is beyond the personal statement that the Common App offers. So all of this is to say that students should really make the time to get working on these essays. I say, wait a couple of weeks after junior year and decompress a little bit after junior year. And then by around July 1st, in between the junior and senior year, I recommend starting to write those essays. If you do that, your main essay, if you're making time each week during the summer, you should be able to finish the main one by the time school starts. And then, you can then work on your supplemental essays throughout September, October, and probably apply early on November 1st. Just so that it is not common at all for students to get assistance on these essays from guidance counselors or English teachers. And quite frankly, when they do, the essays are often not usable for the application. And I'm not saying this because I am trying to drum up business for myself. I am so busy. Of course, I would love to work with your child, but I don't need the extra business by lying to you. I can only tell you the truth of what has happened. The best case scenario is that a student came to me with an essay he wrote with his English teacher, and we used the core idea and we needed to revise it. It wasn't terrible, but much more often, is a case like I worked with a student several years ago who had worked in AP English on his essay with his teacher in class for 6 weeks and came to me around this time, or maybe even later. I feel like it was October 20 something, to apply November 1st early to Brown University, which is an Ivy League school, and your essay needs to be top notch. He was told by a family friend who does alumni interviewing there that his essay was unacceptable and we had to start from scratch. He didn't get accepted to Brown, but he did get accepted to University of Michigan, which is also a highly selective school. And I don't think he would have even gotten that had he not revised that essay. So I really can't impress upon you enough the importance of getting, if you get guidance, for from somebody who understands what colleges are looking for. If you're wondering why your child is avoiding writing the essay, it's because high school teachers, look, I was a high school history teacher. I taught AP US history. I taught Regents level history. It's very easy to tell, people, start this way. Your intro needs a thesis. Your body paragraphs need a topic sentence. You need evidence, analyze it, next body paragraph. This kind of essay is completely unlike that because it's about themselves. And students have never been asked to write about themselves. And the best thing I can share with them is a quote by Nathaniel Hawthorne, which is easy reading is damn hard writing. And it is incredibly difficult. So the best thing they can do is give themselves time to do it. So a general timeline that looks, what students will sort of look like of what they're doing when is that 8th through 10th grade, they want to be generally exploring colleges. The summer before 11th, as long as they have taken Algebra 2 already, they can prepare for it and start taking the SAT, ACT at the end of that summer. If they haven't taken Algebra 2, then I would recommend probably waiting until the spring of their junior year when they have taken at least most of Algebra 2. The reason I like students taking the SAT or ACT early, if they have the math under their belt, is because once they have that score, they can start to build their college list and they know sort of what colleges might be reaches, what colleges are targets, and what colleges are likely. If you're interested in learning more about how to build a college list, again, I refer you to my YouTube where I have a talk on that, on building a balanced list. The summer before 12th grade, I recommend starting to fill out the Common App, just, sort of demographic information, the activities list, starting and finishing the essay. And then in the 12th grade, autumn and winter, finishing the supplementals, apply early for the school you really want to go to on November 1st or 15th, and then apply regular decision for other schools in January. And then by generally late March, early April, students get their decisions, and then they have to let the colleges know which one they're going to by May 1st. So that's tonight's talk. If you'd like to receive Dr. P's college app tips, which is a little virtual handout I have for you, please feel free to email me at info@crimsoncoaching.com for that. You can like Crimson Coaching on Facebook, but I will admit that a much better way to get news of upcoming talks is by going to my website, and on the homepage, there is a little black banner that says, sign up for our Desk to Nest newsletter. The newsletter comes just once a month. I don't share your email with anybody. You can unsubscribe at any time, but it comes with a little article on either the college planning process or some aspect of adolescent education. And then down at the bottom, it lists all of my talks, either in person or online, that I'm giving for that month. And they are always free. And then if you're interested in any of the talks that I've mentioned, again, you can go to youtube.com/c/Crimson Coaching. I think if you leave out that middle C, it'll also bring you to my YouTube. And if you go there, I would really appreciate if you hit the little red subscribe button. That helps the channel to grow. So that's the end of the talk. I know sometimes people kind of fall off during the question and answer period. So if you need to leave, I just want to thank you for coming. But let me just check out the chat because Oh, somebody said hello, hello. But I'm happy for you to either write your question in the chat, or there's so few of us, feel free to unmute yourself if you have a question now. So the question in the chat is, if an 11th grader did not take the SAT this past summer, can she still take it this coming August? Yes, but I would not wait that long. So there's many opportunities to take the SAT throughout the year. I believe there are 7 opportunities. So there was just one in early October. There's another one November, another one December. Then there's March, May, June, and August. Yeah, so there's 7. At least that's how it's been for the last couple of years. The reason why I would never recommend that a current 11th grader wait all the way until August is you never want that to be your first test because you're already going into 12th grade. You really want to know, I would say, if you haven't taken Algebra 2, you probably, I think the latest that you should take your SAT would be in May and June of your junior year. And then if you still really wanted to push it, maybe August. I mean, I have had students I had a couple of students take it recently in October, but I'll admit, I think it's very stressful for them because they don't yet know where they're falling, where their score is. And it's hard to figure out where you want to go to college unless you know what your SAT score is. The question here is, how many months does she need to prepare with a professional for SAT? I mean, you probably get as many answers to that question, Tatiana, as there are people who prep students for the SAT. I give complimentary consultations that if you're looking for an SAT tutor, I'd be happy to talk with you about that based on where she is academically. But I think as long as the student, excuse me, doesn't need a ton of remediation, there's really no reason why the student needs to prepare more than 10 weeks of sustained intensive study, which I find is the best. There are certain companies that will, excuse me, there are companies that might that work 18 months with students. I find that that's way too long and it's just dragging them down. You want to make sure that your child is putting the majority of their intellectual energy into their coursework. So, summer is such a great time because they don't have that coursework and they can put all their energy in, but lots of kids are doing other things over the summer. So if you say, well, we may miss a week or 2, well then maybe you want to look at 12 weeks. I happen to do one small group class a year. It'll start this year in late January. So again, if you want to get information on that, if you sign up for my newsletter, that'll come in the newsletter starting probably next month. I'll start telling people about that. And that's just kind of a nice way. The small group classes obviously much less expensive than taking private coaching, although I would say Jeffrey Salingo, the author of that book that I mentioned, did cite studies that show that really the only real gains in SAT scores does come with working one-on-one with someone. Sure. Romeo, you raised your hand earlier. Would you like to unmute yourself and ask a question?
Yeah. So the question here is, based on the PSAT score, what kind of projections can we derive for SATs? And can training make a real good difference if you want to hike and increase the scores?
Yeah.
By how much? What should be the realistic expectations based on that PSAT score? And
so, for those of you who are unaware, sometimes sophomores and always juniors in most American high schools take the PSAT, which is the preliminary SAT, and it's scored on a different scoring level. So you could basically assume at about 80 points or so, maybe 90 to your child's PSAT score, and that's what they would get on that most likely on the SAT if they took it in several months thereafter, right? I think that definitely preparing helps. I mean, I know both in terms of the small group classes, they can often help with even just confidence, test taking confidence, but also they yielded real gains in student scores as well. I will say that this generation of kids had one or more math subjects that they learned online. And for instance, I just worked with a girl, a 10th grader at 5 p.m. tonight. She supposedly learned geometry completely online, but she said it was, they were never given tests. It was in her high school, it was not very serious. And so now I am teaching her the geometry that she needs to know. I also find that frequently with Algebra 1, a lot of students, at least now, took Algebra 1 during the pandemic, and unfortunately they were in Algebra 2 later, but their foundational Algebra 1 was very shaky. So the good thing about private coaching, quite frankly, is that a knowledgeable tutor will be able to see where the deficiencies are. And so, for example, this girl who had in essence, no geometry at all, we're going very slowly over that. But to make up for that, I'm sort of giving her other things that she feels more comfortable with to do on her own. I could tell you my students have gone up anywhere from say 10 to 25% after private coaching with me based on their initial diagnostic score.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Any other questions? All right, well, I'm going to stop sharing my screen then. Thank you all so much for staying and for coming out tonight. It was really nice hearing from a couple of you. And, if you have any questions, feel free to email me. Like I said, on my website, on the contact page, you'll see there's a sign up link for a free 30-minute consultation. And I'm happy to give that to people if they're thinking about essay coaching or SAT coaching or any combination thereof. Have a great night.